Welcome back to the second in our mini-series, Buddhist Concepts, within the program Meditation for All. Last week I talked a little bit in introduction about some of the connections which we make in Buddhism, which are sometimes not made elsewhere, particularly the connection between the level of the mind, the level of our lifestyle, and the level of the environment. Sometimes simply saying this is not quite so easy to imagine how these three levels of description can fit together. But today I want to tell you a tale. It's a legend, if you like, from the Buddhist scriptures, which describes what we call Buddhist Genesis. It talks about the times very early in the history of our world, before human beings came to live here on this earth. In Buddhism, often we try to avoid speculating about things which are without immediate proof, because the Buddha said that for some aspects of our existence, no matter how hard we think about them, that it's impossible to find enough proof to get free of our speculation. So in the end, one can simply waste one's time speculating. So today, when you listen to this legend from what we call the Aggañña Sutta in our Buddhist scriptures, when you hear about the Buddhist version of Genesis, then perhaps keep an open mind, treat it as a tale if you like, but if you can, try to find some of the important messages which come out of this legend or this teaching, and in fact we can learn a lot about them in terms of what we see as our ideals in our Buddhist society. Well, there's something about Buddhist version of Genesis which has something in common with the Christian version of Genesis, and that is that they both have eating in common. The eating was the first thing to start things off, also in the Buddhist version of Genesis. And the Aggañña Sutta starts at a time in the universe when there was nothing in the universe, not even any planets. The only things in the universe were some self-illuminating beings which we call apasara, or celestial beings which were illuminated of their own minds. So that means that their minds were so bright that they gave the only illumination present in the universe at that time. These beings were able to survive simply on their own happiness and joy from all the merits which they had cultivated since the time they were human beings. Because they were self-sufficient in their own happiness, they didn't have any need to eat anything or any other need to find happiness in any other way. But at that time there was a planet which was cooling down, our planet Earth in effect, and it had already been through a world cycle where the Earth had been on fire for many years. As the fires cooled down, then the smell of the earth was aromatic, rather like newly baked bread. And this captured the curiosity of these apasara brahmas, which were floating around from one place to another in the universe. There was one particularly curious apasara brahma which came down near to the surface of the earth and tasted some of this aromatic curds of earth, as we call it, which were floating on the surface of the seas which were covering the planet. When the apasara tasted this, in fact the taste was so good that it wanted to eat more. When it ate more, in fact it was not alone, but many of the other apasaras who were also attracted by the actions of this being ate more and more until, in fact, from their normal ethereal states, they became more coarse and eventually physical in their makeup, which meant that they could no longer fly around in the universe as they had before, but they were now stranded on the planet Earth. Some of the beings which ate more of this curds of earth became dull in their complexion, as compared with the normal bright complexion of the apasara brahmas. And even very early in the history of our world, there was some discrimination. The brighter complexion apasara brahmas looked down upon the darker complexioned ones. Because the first apasara brahma had given in so easily to its craving, what happened was that the simple change in the quality of the mind of this apasara Brahma gave rise into the universe to a very big change. The stars and the planets started to appear. There was sunlight, moonlight, and there started to be night and day. From the very special curds of earth, which for most people would be considered a very delicate form of food, in fact this was very quickly exhausted by the greed of the apasara Brahmas. And in its place grew up a different sort of food in its place, and it was no longer curds of earth, but it was rather like a mushroom-like vegetable, also very nutritious. But once the apasara Brahmas started to use this as their staple food, in fact their body found difficulty to digest it. As a result of the difficulty in digestion, there started to be the formation of intestinal tracts and digestive organs within their body. With this came the distinction of sexual organs as well for these beings. Formerly they had transcended male or female, but now as the beings started to develop digestive organs, those who had in their past never had any bad karma of being unfaithful to their husbands or wives developed male organs. Those who had bad karma in their past from being unfaithful to their husbands or wives developed female organs. So there started to be a segregation or a distinction between male and female within this community of these primordial human beings. Over the years, and the lengths of time we are talking about now are very long lengths of time indeed, not just normal years passing by, but aeons and generations, there was a gradual decomposition in the quality of the minds of the beings. Those who before were contented in their own happiness now became attracted male to female, and although they had no need to reproduce, but they did so simply because of their desires, and they started to form homesteads in which they could hide their shameful actions. And once they settled down, then also the foodstuffs started to change from being the mushroom-like vegetables they had known into being a sort of creepers. As they became possessive about their territories, then this again started to cause the foodstuffs available in the environment to become more and more coarse, until eventually all that was left was husks of rice for them to eat. Each person would go out and harvest rice in the morning, only enough for them to eat each day, and by the evening the rice seeds would have grown back in place without any scar apparent. Later, as people became more dishonest or lazy, they found it too much trouble to go out and harvest food each and every day, so some of the more lazy ones would harvest 2 days' worth of food in a single day, so that on alternating days they wouldn't have to go out and work for a living. And even that was not enough for some. They would not respect their own territories, but they would steal food from other people's territories as well. So there was a degradation in the quality of society. There started to be stealing, and those who were caught always maintained that they had not been stealing, so there was also lying. And we see a gradual decomposition in people's lifestyle from at least 5 precepts, which was the normal way of life, into much less than that, where even the 5 precepts were not kept properly anymore, and the state of society got worse and worse until eventually the people were at their wits' end and they had to set up a king who was the person to make the decisions concerning the justice in their society. So we see this happening in the very first years of the world cycle. World cycle, I have a graph here which you can see, which maybe makes things a little bit easier. The length of time we're talking about are very long indeed. The length of time between the earth decaying and being re-evolving, with the apasaras coming down once again to live there, is a length of time which is very, very long indeed. Some of you may have heard the example of the length of time it would take for a mountain made of solid rock, 16 kilometers high, 16 kilometers wide, 16 kilometers deep, to be worn down flat with the ground by a person coming to wipe that mountain once every 100 years. If you can imagine that length of time, we call that length of time an aeon. And the sort of lengths of time we're talking about here are not just one aeon, but one multiplied by 10 to the power of 140 aeons. This very long length of time is the time it takes for human beings to degrade from being high-level apasaras down to a low level where their lifespan becomes gradually shorter and shorter, until eventually passing through our own era when the lifespan is approximately 75 years. In fact, the lifespan would continue to get less as people's quality of mind degrades more and more. As people cannot keep the 5 precepts anymore, their lifespan will decrease more and more, till eventually it's said, not in the Aggañña Sutta, but in another sutra we find in the Buddhist scriptures, which is called the Cakkavatti Sutta, that people will be reduced in their lifespan down to the age of only 10 years. And it's said that the decrease in lifespan will become 1 year less for every 100 years of human life. This is what happens if we continue to degrade in the quality of our morality and lifestyle at the present rate. At that time it's said that people will hunt each other as if they were animals to hunt. They'll have no respect for husbands or wives anymore, and their lifestyle would be no different from that of savages or of animals. This would be the very most point of the world cycle. And when this happens in the end, there's going to be some sort of holocaust before people come to their senses and start to practice good deeds again, which will lead to there being an increase in the length of the human lifespan again. So we can see that in this legend, if you like, or in this account in the scriptures, we see that there is a very strong connection between what happens to the environment, the quality of people's lifestyle, and also the number of defilements in their mind, such as the greed which the first brahmas succumb to fall from their usual angelic state. But what we learn from this Aggañña Sutta, which I'd like to highlight, is that in Buddhism we do believe that the original nature of human beings is good and to have a mind of high quality, but it's other things which have intervened, especially in terms of defilements, which have caused us to fall away from this natural state of being. The other thing is that our average lifespan decreases as the quality of our life becomes worse, especially in terms of the behaviors which we have. This is not something which happens automatically. It's something which we can slow down or freeze if we take more care of the quality of our lives, especially our own behaviors. We don't need to wait for us to be left with a lifespan of only 10 years, but we can try to work against that by maintaining the quality of our wholesome behaviors in our life. And last of all is the timescales which we're dealing with. They are very long timescales indeed, much longer than even science talks about in the present day. These are sometimes beyond our imagination, but it does help to explain why the historical records which we have in the fossils doesn't even extend as far back as some of the descriptions of history which we have in the Buddhist scriptures. So it's taking this much longer time scale that we learn about many of the things which I've talked about in the Aggañña Sutta today. But what is important from what I mentioned is that the actions which we do affect the quality of our lives. There is an interconnectedness here. And the question is, what exactly do we mean by this wholesomeness? How exactly can we avoid the unwholesome behaviors which will lead to a decrease in our quality of life? And it's in order to give definitions of some of these that I'll be talking to you next week about some of the qualities of what we mean by the energy which we call merit, and how we can accrue this, and how this can help us to have more prosperity and more happiness in our lives. So I leave you with these things. Anyone interested to read up more can look either in the Aggañña Sutta of the Digha Nikaya or in the Cakkavatti Sutta also in the Digha Nikaya for further references. But that's all for this week, and I look forward to seeing you again at the same time next week.